Hello and welcome to Winning Calls with Oracle. This is a virtual race viewing event which today features the US SailGP team, specifically the skipper, Rome Kirby, and the data analyst, Phil Crane. I'm your host, Ed Lee, and together in a couple of minutes we're going to be reliving one of my personal favourite races from Season 1 of SailGP. It's the fifth and final fleet race from New York City, which took place in June of 2019, just off Manhattan on the Hudson River, under the watchful gaze of the Statue of Liberty. On the day, winds were strong. They were tearing through Jersey City and they were gusty, which made racing very, very difficult. A little bit of a lottery, if you like. Nevertheless, Australia and Japan had booked their places in the final winner-takes-all match race, so the top two spots were decided. But a podium has three spots, and the US had their sights firmly set on that. In Rome Kirby as their skipper, they had one of the most talented American sailors of his generation at the helm. And they'd done their homework. They'd looked at all of the data, they'd studied their previous races, and they had their sights set on a first ever victory on SailGP in home waters on the Hudson, not least because Rome's a local of Rhode Island, so this was most definitely his home race. But the key to doing this would be data-driven insight. During each race, millions of data points stream from hundreds of sensors on board each of the F50s up to the Oracle Cloud and then back down to each team's data dashboard in less than 150 milliseconds. Phil Crane, the US data analyst, as with all of the SailGP teams, has access to all of the data streaming from every F50. His role is to decipher that data and use the insight to give the team an advantage. And since all of the F50s are exactly the same design and are delivering open data streams, it means that there are no secrets or subterfuge. The teams have the ability to learn directly from each other. So, without further delay, let's sit down with Rome Kirby and Phil Crane. Gentlemen, welcome. Thank you both for joining us. Rome Kirby, skipper, and Phil Crane, data analyst for the US SailGP team. Rome, we'll start with you. It was a less than ideal start to the New York SailGP event, wasn't it?
It definitely was. New York's definitely a tricky place to sail, and we lost our wing trimmer, Riley Gibbs, about 20 minutes to the first race, and we had to have our shore team manager, Jeff Causey, step in for the first day, and then we flew in Tom Johnson overnight to sail with us on Sunday.
Two personnel changes in 48 hours in one of the most pivotal roles is less than ideal.
Definitely not ideal. It was a bit tough, especially with the lead up we had. We felt like we were sailing pretty well, and to lose Riley was a tough one.
I remember on the boat audio hearing you say before the first race in New York, let's just bring the boat home. So it was that was the strategy at the beginning of the event with those personnel changes. But Phil, how was it for you? This was the third event of the first season. Had you started to get a handle on the data? Were there points where you were seeing your role actually make gains out on the water?
Yeah, so one of the things in these boats that you can always get better at is maneuvering. And after the first two events, we identified areas of our maneuvers that we could improve and change some of the things with our crew work leading into this event. And the way we did that was looking at the data, seeing the stability of the boat and the differences that we could make. And I think we did a really good job going into this event of improving those maneuvers.
Let's head down to the Hudson now and take a look at the fifth and final race of the New York SailGP event. So we've got the actual race feed there at the top on the left-hand side, and then we've got the onboard cameras, and then we've got all of the data that I'm guessing you can see on the boat, Rome, and then you can obviously see on your data dashboard as well, Phil. Rome, talk us through the start, because it's a little bit like a serve in tennis, isn't it?
Yeah, we were one of the first boats into the starting box, and the starting box was pushed right up against the shoreline in New York, and the current was moving pretty quick right to left, looking down the Hudson. So we definitely set ourselves up higher in the start box. Just trying to remember we put ourselves a bit higher than some of the other boats. We kind of gave ourselves, we were just going for a high percentage move. We wanted to just get off the line clean. And right now you're just kind of trying to time. It's just all time on distance. We knew some of the other boats were going to get close to the pin. We didn't want to get close to them. again, there was a lot of current moving.
How much is instinct and how much is working on the data that you can see on the screen?
It's a fair bit. We're using a lot of data. We've got time on distance on our wing display. We kind of have the favorite end of the line. There's a lot of different things on the actual display that you use to start the boat. And but then it obviously comes down to feel, because it's pretty tough. You can see the boats at the leeward end of the line get hung up. We got a pretty decent start here. We were off and running pretty early, and there's a lot of feel that comes into it after that. But we have a lot of data, at our fingertips that we use.
Phil, you've obviously analysed a lot of those starts. Was there anything that you could see in New York specifically in the data in the previous 4 races that could help you with that?
The critical thing, like any start, was being at speed at go on the line, and the guys did a really good job on that start of doing that.
I noticed there as well that there was the closest boat to you. There seemed to be a kind of magnetism during this race for you guys to the French boat.
Yeah, we couldn't. We definitely had a few incidents with them, whether we were rounding the bottom mark and they were coming into the leeward gate. Yeah, we had a couple. Then I think we had we tacked on to starboard early on in this race, but I'm sure we'll see that soon.
Okay, so second place round the bottom mark here. As you said, the wind moving from left to right. So you've got the upwind leg now. You're hammering into this. And after a terrible start, the Australians have pushed their way up here. What are you thinking at this point?
Yeah, we had a pretty bad bottom mark rounding. That definitely hasn't been our strong suit, especially with a new controller, and we were learning kind of on the fly there. And we decided to push it all the way to boundary here. We felt like the best pressure was coming off the New York side. There was a lot of lifted breeze coming off the New York side. And so we went all the way to boundary. We tacked. We felt like it was a penalty on France at that point in time. But I guess, the judges thought otherwise. And
there was a brilliant look there. I could see you as you ran across the platform, looking over your shoulder to check that Billy Besson was making the turn on the French boat.
Yeah, I definitely. I think I delayed the turn, whereas had it been season, I would have just let it rip. But we were all pretty new to it still, and he obviously, you can hear him there. He felt like it was pretty close, but it wasn't that close.
No, well, as we'll see later on, there are some closer crosses in this race. Phil, what are you working on? You talked earlier on about the way that you could work through transitions. This is the upwind leg, so the boat's turning quite a lot into the wind, and it's gusty conditions. So the key is to try and keep the boat flying. And so many times we saw this where the boats are dropping off the foils, and that it's excruciating for the sailors. Is there anything that you could do in the build up to this to help them?
Yeah, so in a venue like San Francisco where we raced previously, the wind's very steady, and we really focused on our straight line boat speed. It's great to get locked in, but New York's completely different with the wind all up and down like that. And so we kind of had to change the type of data that we looked at, the way that we analyzed some of the racing. And we were really looking at how dynamic the boat is and the things that you can do to keep the boat going through those lulls when the breeze shuts down like that. So we looked at some of the techniques of the other teams, what they were doing, how they were controlling the boat, to try and improve ours and make sure that we were keeping the boat foiling for as long as possible.
Rome, was this that decision to split at the mark there? Was that simply because Japan had taken the other mark? You opted for the downwind mark there?
We saw the kind of the windward gates were right in the lee of a big building on the New Jersey side. So if you could get into pressure on the New Jersey side and you could run down the boundary, there's definitely a big light spot kind of in the middle of the racetrack. And you see Japan out on the other side, kind of like I said earlier, we felt, the left side of the track looking upwind was pretty good because you get lifted pressure looking upwind, headed pressure downwind, and you see the Japanese come ripping down. I think it might be the next leg, but yeah, we were just trying to stay in the best pressure and minimize our maneuvers. We were down speed coming to that top mark, and we didn't want to do another tack. So we just scraped around that mark and got into pressure and kind of got back into the race here, which was good.
Yeah, that was a fantastic leg there, because you saw yourselves and the Japanese boats just drag racing essentially into those marks, just flat chat. Are the numbers that you saw on that downwind leg, were you happy with those, Phil?
Yes, I mean they did an awesome job on that leg. It's really hard at this venue to get solid numbers and say, compare. Are you hitting the simulated numbers that you would expect? But if what they really did well was get into the pressure, so you see that they were in more wind on that downwind leg, and that's really the number you look at in a venue like this: is who is in the higher pressure, the stronger wind, the most of the time.
Rome, was there such a thing as a sort of home advantage on these waters, or was it a lottery out there with the gusts?
It was a bit of a lottery. You're just trying to do the best with what you've got, and kind of limit the mistakes. And it was really who could kind of transition and bow handle and stay in the pressure.
Okay, you're in first position here, and sort of in the back of your mind celebrating there, or are you thinking you can't take it for granted in this race, can you?
No, not at all. In SailGP in general, it doesn't matter how big your lead is, and it doesn't matter how close you are to the finish line. It's never over until it's over. The racing's so close and so intense from the start to the finish. The race is never over. We knew we had a lot of work to do. We still had another, finish this upwind. We had a downwind, upwind, and a reach. So there's plenty of racing left. And in a venue like New York, anything can happen. So we're just trying to, again, stay in the pressure and minimize the mistakes. And you'll see here in about probably 10 seconds, the Japanese came flying down in pressure from the New York side, and we rounded side by side. Maybe they jibed early here.
Okay, so
yeah.
The jibe and the tack, little difference between those. The jibe is the turn where you turn away from the wind, the tack where you turn towards the wind. Yeah, so you've dropped off the foils here. But impressively, we've seen the ride time on the data there go up to 69%, Phil. I mean, have you looked back at any of this data and compared it against the other teams? How was the ride time comparing in New York?
Yeah, I think in particular in this race, we did an awesome job staying on the foils. And another thing to look at is the height that the boats are actually flying at. And you'll notice that some of the boats are flying a bit higher, some lower. We had sort of a mid-range, a bit conservative flying height, which I think helped us go through those lulls and go through those gusts and keep the boat going. Other teams were a bit aggressive, maybe flew too high and would come off the foils if they got a big gust and got unstable.
It certainly seemed the case, Rome, in the first two events in San Francisco and Sydney, that the consistency of the Japanese and the Australian team was what saw them through. They weren't necessarily faster, and it felt like you guys really started to click here in this race, and the consistency of manoeuvres was what started to pay dividends for you. Oh.
Yeah, that was close. But yeah, the Australians and the Japanese were so consistent throughout the entire season. The rest of us were just trying to play catch up and close the gap between those guys.
Well, that's evident in exactly this period of racing. The pressure that they're applying on you here is so heavy. They're literally snapping at your heels.
They were probably, I would say, a meter off our back corner, off our transom, and yeah, we came around. We had rights. They had, we knew we just wanted to get a good rounding and get off and get over to that New York shoreline, because we knew once we got to the shoreline, we saw pressure, and you see it here. We get into that pressure, and it's lifted pressure, and here we wanted to get a bit bow forward in the lifted pressure, just to kind of not seal the deal, but definitely be in a more conservative. We wanted to put a little distance between them and be in a bit more controlling position, and we were able to stay in the pressure longer, so we kind of stayed up in the pressure, and we called a pretty conservative lay line here. We just wanted to make sure we stayed between our man and the hoop, so we definitely, with the current, we weren't going to do a double tack. We didn't want to miss that lay line, so we definitely called a pretty safe lay line there.
I was going to say one of the other factors here is, as Rome has mentioned, is the current was a significant factor in this race. And before the racing, we run simulations of the race course. We look at the speeds of the current across the course, and we can actually plot a route around the course and what might be the best route or where we can gain the most advantage by going into less or more current throughout the race. And you can see these guys did a good job of using both the spots with the most wind and with the most advantageous current as they went around the course to win the race there.
Well, that was absolutely evident on that last upwind leg that we just watched. You could see the Australian and the Japanese boats just getting towed away. As you said, they hadn't found that the better wind further up the river, and they were just getting dragged away. So you called it a conservative ley line, the trajectory you took from the first manoeuvre up to the mark. But you set that and you kept the boat up on the foils.
Yeah, we were obviously in good breeze, so we kind of that starboard across the racetrack. We sailed pretty fast. We wanted to get a little bow forward on them and be in a little bit more of a controlling position. And then the last tack we did around the reach mark, we definitely called another conservative one. We definitely didn't want to call a thin ley line there. We just wanted to kind of put it in the bag and take the win.
And that's exactly what you're doing here. And it's within 100 meters of a packed lower Manhattan crowd. And I was listening on the broadcast, but from friends who were stood on the side there, it was an ecstatic response from the fans. How did it feel for you guys on the boat?
Yeah, it was awesome. It was pretty special to win. You know, we had a pretty tough regatta, obviously with the crew, Riley getting hurt, and then with TJ filling in, and to kind of get the boat through Saturday and then come out and really push Sunday and get that race win and then end up on the podium in front of our home crowd was pretty awesome.
Phil, for you, was it vindication that what you were doing was working? A couple of things you said there while we were talking about it were points that you'd obviously worked on, and you saw the advantages gained there.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd spent a lot of time analyzing many aspects of the racing and how we could do better. And we knew that we were there and we could win races, and it was vindication that that they could do that.
Was there a moment in the race, a pivotal moment that you could put your finger on and say, this is where the race was won for us?
There was probably a couple, but I would say one was, the transition. I think it was the second to last upwind. That transition from foiling to not foiling. We carried our boat speed, we got around, and we got back in pressure, and we kind of ran down the starboard boundary on the right-hand side of the course. We overstood the bottom gate, but we were definitely in breeze the whole time, and I think that was a pretty critical moment.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure whether it plays in technically, but under an immense amount of pressure from both Japan and Australia, it felt like you held your nerve, and certainly as a team, you kept your consistency.
Yeah, it was nice to see. They were putting the heat on us big time, and we kept it together and pulled out the win.
Okay, same question to you, Phil. And you obviously have the benefit of hindsight with the data as well.
Yeah, so I think I can remember actually looking at the wind sensor on the boat. So every single boat has a wind sensor on it. That's one of the many data points that are streamed to us live. And you can, in a venue like New York, really see the difference between each boat and who's in a puff and who's in a lull. And seeing these guys get this huge puff and carry it all the way, I knew that was going to be good even without watching the video. You knew they were in a good spot.
Phil, Rome, thank you both so much for your time. There's been some absolutely fascinating insight in there. If you're interested in watching more SailGP races, you can do just by downloading the SailGP app. It's free and you'll find it on Google Play and the App Store. If you want to find out more about Oracle's cloud innovation as well, you can on oracle.com/cloud. And don't forget, the next winning calls will be with the Danish SailGP team on July the 23rd. But for now, that's it from Winning Calls with Oracle.